A Hell's Angel receives a hug by mistake from a poor girl and instantly falls in love. But this isn't some fairy tale. It's a thunderstorm of second chances, guilt, and grace. He's a man with a past so dark, the whole town crosses the street when they see him. She's a girl barely holding her family together, just trying to keep faith alive. One hug, one tiny act of kindness, sets off a chain of events no one could predict. The town whispers. The church turns its back. And when his old biker gang comes roaring back, her simple hug becomes the spark that could destroy them both, or save them forever. Can a single moment of compassion melt the heart of a man who thought he was beyond saving? Or will his past drag them both back into the fire? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The rain came down like it was trying to wash the world clean. The old highway outside Maple Hollow glistened under the dull light of a dying afternoon. A lone motorcycle roared down the wet asphalt, coughing like a wounded animal. The rider, broad shoulders, long hair plastered to his face, black leather jacket shining with rain, leaned forward, muttering under his breath as the engine sputtered and finally gave up. The bike rolled to a stop beside a flickering neon sign that read, "Millie's Place, Home Cooking and Hot Coffee." Jack Mallory swung off the motorcycle and kicked the stand down. His boots sank into the muddy shoulder. He looked up at the sky, jaw tight, and spat out a curse that steamed in the cold air. The rain soaked through his jacket, but he didn't move to cover himself. He'd spent too many years running from storms like this. They always caught him anyway. He pushed open the door to the diner, and a small bell above it jingled. The warm smell of bacon grease and coffee hit him like a wave. Conversation stopped. A dozen pairs of eyes turned toward him. Old men in flannel, truckers halfway through pie, a couple of kids in a corner booth. The place fell quiet except for the hiss of the grill and the soft hum of country music from the jukebox. Jack didn't blame them for staring. He looked every bit the trouble they imagined. Tattoos crawled up his neck like ivy. His eyes were shadowed, sharp, the kind that said, "Don't ask questions." He kept walking, boots thudding heavy on the floor. Behind the counter, a young woman was wiping down plates. She looked up and smiled before she realized who she was smiling at. Her smile froze halfway, but she didn't turn away. "Cold out there, huh?" she said, her voice steady but kind. Jack grunted. "Yeah, cold." She reached for a coffee pot. "You want some? On the house. You look like you could use it." He hesitated, then nodded once. "Thanks." She poured the steaming coffee into a chipped white mug and slid it across the counter. "You passing through or staying? In town?" "Just fixing the bike," he said. "Won't be long." Before she could reply, a man's voice called from the kitchen. "Ellie, can you grab order 6? The woman, Ellie, nodded and hurried off with a tray. Jack's gaze followed her. She couldn't have been more than mid-20s. Her hair was pulled back, and her apron was faded and patched. But there was something in her eyes, something bright and hopeful, that made him uncomfortable. He hadn't seen that kind of light in a long time. He wrapped his hands around the mug. His fingers were rough, scarred from years of work and fights. The coffee was too hot, but he didn't care. The warmth seeped into him slowly, loosening something tight in his chest. The door jingled again, and a gust of rain came with it. Ellie rushed back to the counter, eyes scanning the room. "Are you from the church program?" she asked, her voice rising over the chatter that had slowly returned. Jack blinked. "What?" she gasped, setting her tray down. "Oh, thank God. I thought maybe you weren't coming. You're here to help with my mom's roof, right?" And before he could answer, she stepped around the counter and hugged him, arms wrapping around his soaked jacket, cheek pressed against his chest, holding tight like she hadn't hugged anyone in years. The diner went silent again. Forks stopped mid-air. Jack stood frozen, muscles locked, eyes wide. He hadn't been touched like that in more than a decade. Not since his daughter. He stopped the thought before it hurt too much. When Ellie pulled back, she looked embarrassed. "Oh, I'm sorry, Thank you for coming. We really need the help." Jack's voice came out rough. "You got the wrong guy." Her smile faltered. "Oh, you're not from the church?" He shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am. Just fixing my bike." The air between them hung heavy for a second. Then she laughed softly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Well, that's embarrassing." She still didn't look afraid, though the rest of the diner hadn't taken their eyes off them. "Sorry about that." Jack shrugged. "Could have been worse." "You could have pushed me off," she said, smiling again. That smile did something strange to his chest, something warm and unfamiliar. He nodded once and took another sip of coffee. "Guess I didn't mind." The bell rang again from the kitchen, and she rushed off to grab the next order. The sound of her humming filled the air, light and gentle against the clatter of dishes. Jack sat there longer than he meant to, watching her move. Quick, graceful, never once looking tired even though he could tell she was. When he finally stood to leave, he laid a $5 bill on the counter. Half of what he had left. Next to it, he scribbled a note on a napkin with the diner pen. "Thank you for the hug." He walked out into the rain, the bell jingling behind him, and headed toward his broken motorcycle. He crouched beside it, working by instinct even though he knew it wouldn't start tonight. His mind wasn't on the engine. It was on the warmth of that hug. On the way she hadn't judged him, hadn't flinched. By the time he crawled under the bridge outside of town, his clothes still damp and his stomach empty, he wasn't thinking about the cold anymore. He lay there listening to the rain hit the concrete, staring at the dark river sliding past. For the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him, something he'd forgotten how to name. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was close. He closed his eyes and whispered into the night, almost like a prayer he didn't believe in. "Why her, Lord? Why now?" The rain answered with silence. Morning came clean and bright, washing the town in gold after the hard rain. The highway steamed. Millie's place smelled like bacon and maple syrup, and the jukebox hummed a soft tune from years ago. Ellie wiped the front window with a towel and saw the black motorcycle still parked crooked near the gravel shoulder. She felt heat in her cheeks when she remembered how she had hugged the stranger. She set the towel down and found a napkin by the register with a rough, careful line of letters. "Thank you for the hug." She touched the napkin like it was a note from a friend. Then she folded it small and slipped it into her apron pocket. When the bell on the door jingled, she looked up and there he was again, big frame filling the doorway, jacket creaking as he moved. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much, but his eyes were clear. He nodded in a shy way, as if asking for permission to be there. Ellie gave it with a smile. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please," he said. He took the same stool at the counter. Water still clung to his hair, and when he bent to reach for his wallet, she saw the small hurt on his knuckles, scabbed and raw like the world had chewed on him. She poured him coffee and added a plate before he could ask. 2 pancakes, butter melting slow, 3 slices of bacon, and a small bowl of fresh fruit. She set it down and said, "This one's on me." He looked at the food, then at her. "You don't have to do that." "I know," Ellie said. I want to. Millie stepped out from the kitchen with an order pad in hand. Her eyes narrowed at the scene. Ellie, honey, can I see you a second? She said, already walking toward the back hall. Ellie excused herself and followed. Millie waited until they were out of earshot. I know your heart is a soft one, she said, tapping the pad against her palm. But that man is trouble. He hasn't done anything wrong, Ellie said, keeping her voice low. Not yet. But I know his kind. Millie's tone wasn't hateful, just tired. He rode with the devils of Dayton. Folks get hurt around men like that. I don't need you getting stuck in something messy. Ellie thought of the hug. It had not felt messy. It had felt like throwing a blanket around a freezing dog. Sometimes people surprise you, she said. Sometimes they do, Millie agreed, eyes gentler now. Just keep both eyes open. Ellie went back to the counter. The man, she still didn't know his name, had not touched the pancakes. He sat straight as a beam, hands around the coffee, watching the door like it might scold him. She slid onto the stool across from him and said, It's okay to eat. He picked up the fork. I'm not used to free things. Good thing you paid for them, she said, nodding toward the napkin sticking out of her pocket. You left a note. That counts. A small smile pulled at his mouth. Didn't mean to make a scene last night. You didn't, Ellie said. I did. I was waiting for a church volunteer. Wrong guy. She shrugged, half laughing at herself. You took it well. Been called worse than volunteer, he said. He took a bite, chewed slow, closed his eyes for a second like the food carried him someplace safe. These are good. Millie's secret recipe. Don't ask what's in it. Ellie leaned her elbows on the counter. What's your name? He hesitated, as if the answer might change the room. Jack? Nice to meet you, Jack. I'm Ellie. He nodded once. Nice to meet you, Ellie. Two old farmers in the corner booth eyed them, shaking their heads. A trucker muttered something about wolves in leather. Jack heard it. Ellie saw the way his jaw worked, the way his shoulders tightened. He didn't answer the man. He cut another bite and ate steady. The restraint told Ellie more about him than any story could. When the breakfast rush eased, Ellie slid him a paper bag with a sandwich inside. For later, she said, a little embarrassed by how proud she felt. You keep doing that? Jack said. What? Making it hard to leave. She looked down at the counter, tracing a scratch with her finger. Sometimes people need a reason to stay. At noon, Jack stepped outside to check his bike. He bent over the engine, hands moving like a prayer he still remembered. Ellie watched through the window and saw how careful he was, how he treated the machine with respect, not force. She carried out a small toolkit from the back and placed it on the step. If you need it, she said. He lifted his eyes to hers, and for a beat, the noise of the road fell away. By late afternoon, the sky turned clear, hard blue. Jack wiped his hands on a rag and stood. I should go. Ellie nodded. She didn't ask where. He reached into his pocket and put a crumpled $5 bill on the counter, the same one he had left last night, now returned. For today, he said. Not a charity case. I never thought you were, Ellie said. He looked like he wanted to say more, then didn't. He pressed his lips together, gave a short nod, and walked out. The bell jingled. The force dock were closed. The air felt colder without him. When Ellie's shift ended, she wrapped her scarf tight and headed home on foot. Maple Hollow's old houses leaned into each other like tired friends. Her little place sat at the end of a narrow street, paint peeling, porch boards soft. Inside, The air smelled like mint tea and laundry soap. Her mother, Margaret, lay propped on pillows on the couch, a knit blanket pulled to her chin. Sammy, 12 and all elbows and energy, sat cross-legged on the floor building a small car from plastic bricks. "You're late," Sammy said without looking up. "Busy day," Ellie said, hanging her coat by the door. She kissed her mother's forehead. It felt warm, but not scary warm. "How you feeling, Mama?" "Like old bones in a new storm," Margaret said, smiling weakly. "But the sun came out. That helps." Ellie set the paper bag from Millie's on the table. "I brought soup." Sammy sniffed the air. "Did you see him again? The biker?" Ellie poured the soup into bowls. "He has a name, Jack." Margaret's eyes softened. "The man you hugged." Ellie bit her lip. "I thought he was from church. He wasn't, but he was gentle. He didn't mind." "Sometimes the Lord sends the right person by the wrong door," Margaret said, folding her hands. After dinner, Ellie sorted bills at the small kitchen table. Numbers didn't care about kindness. Rent was late. The pharmacy had raised the cost of Margaret's medication again. Ellie stared at the stack and felt the slow squeeze of fear. She pressed her palm flat over the figures like she could hold them in place. Sammy came to her side. "We'll be okay," he said, trying on bravery like a jacket too big for him. "We will," she said, kissing his hair. "We always are." Night settled. Ellie washed dishes while Margaret dozed. On the back step, she looked up at the clear sky, stars bright like nails in dark wood. She thought of Jack under that same sky somewhere. She wondered if he had a dry place to sleep. She wondered why a hug had felt like a promise. On the far edge of town, Jack lay under the concrete span of the bridge again, his jacket rolled as a pillow, the river whispering secret things. He held the paper bag Ellie had given him and ate half the sandwich, then wrapped the rest with care. The napkin note rested in his pocket now. He took it out, touched the words. He tried to remember the last time someone had thanked him for anything. Headlights passed across the underbelly of the bridge like ghosts. Somewhere a dog barked and then settled. Jack closed his eyes and listened to his own breathing until it sounded steady. The hunger in his stomach was smaller tonight. The ache in his hands was dull. The ache in his chest was new, but it did not scare him. Before sleep found him, he spoke into the dark. "If you're there, watch over the girl." He didn't add, "and her mother and boy," but the thought went up anyway, like a thin line of smoke that did not break. Back at the house, Ellie turned off the kitchen light and stood by her mother's side, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. She brushed a strand of hair from Margaret's face and whispered, "God, send the help I asked for." She didn't know that help sometimes roared in on two wheels and slept under bridges. She only knew the next day would come, and she would meet it, and she would keep the door of her heart open, even if it let storms in. The town went quiet. The highway cooled. On two sides of Maple Hollow, two people who did not yet belong to each other lay in the soft hold of the same night and dreamed of warm kitchens and safe roofs and hands that didn't shake. The next few mornings came quiet and steady. The rain stopped, and the roads of Maple Hollow dried into long ribbons of dust. The leaves along the roadside began to turn gold. Each day, the black motorcycle appeared outside Millie's place, just as Ellie unlocked the door. And each day, she tried not to smile too wide when she saw it. Jack would come in, take the same stool, order black coffee, and eat slow. He spoke little, his voice always low and rough, but something about his silence felt peaceful. Ellie found herself talking to fill the space. Small stories about her brother's jokes, her mama's garden, the funny things customers said. Jack just listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes giving a small grunt of a laugh. "Guess you like it here," she said one morning while refilling his cup. "Guess I do," he replied. "Quiet place. Folks stare less now." "They're warming up to you," she said, though she wasn't sure that was true. He looked down at his coffee, steam rising. "They'll forget about me soon enough." Ellie wiped the counter, studying him. There was something about the way he said it, like he wanted it to be true but didn't believe it could be. That afternoon, the bell jingled, and an elderly man hobbled in, dragging a walker that squeaked. He asked for a seat near the window, but before Ellie could help, one of the legs of the walker gave out. Jack was there first, kneeling without a word. He twisted a wrench from his pocket, tightened a screw, and set the walker upright again. The old man blinked at him. "Didn't expect a biker to be a handyman." Jack shrugged. "Didn't expect your walker to quit." The diner laughed softly. Ellie saw it. The small shift, the way a few folks stopped staring and started nodding instead. When the lunch rush ended, Jack slipped out without a goodbye. Ellie followed him with her eyes as he crossed the street to where his motorcycle gleamed under the sun. He paused, looked back once, and raised a hand. She waved, pretending it was nothing, but her heart skipped anyway. 2 nights later, Ellie was closing up when she noticed the diner's old neon sign sputtering. The open light blinked weakly, half the letters dark. She grabbed a stool and screwdriver, but before she could climb up, Jack's voice came from behind her. "You'll fall if you do that alone," he said, stepping out of the shadows with a small flashlight. Ellie turned, surprised. "You scared me." "Didn't mean to. I was walking by, saw the light flicker." He took the screwdriver from her hand and fixed the wiring like he'd done it 100 times. When the red glow returned, the whole word shone bright again. "There," he said. "Good as new." Ellie handed him a slice of pie she had boxed up for herself. "Payment?" He hesitated, then accepted it. They sat at the counter, the diner quiet except for the ticking clock. "You always this kind to strangers?" he asked. "Only to the ones who fix lights," she teased, smiling. "And maybe to the ones who look like they've forgotten what kindness feels like." He blinked at that, looking down at the fork in his hand. "Yeah," he said softly. "Maybe I had." The air between them grew still but warm. The pie sat half-eaten, forgotten. Ellie felt something shift inside her, a tenderness mixed with curiosity. She wanted to ask about his past, but something in his eyes said don't. When the clock struck 10, he stood. "Thanks for the pie." "Anytime," she said, "and thanks for the light." He gave a faint smile and walked into the night. Ellie watched through the window as he disappeared down the street. The town was dark and silent, except for the hum of a motorcycle starting in the distance. A week passed, and Jack became part of the rhythm of Millie's place. Some customers still whispered, but more began to nod at him when he held the door or fixed something broken. He didn't talk about himself, but his actions spoke plenty. He carried groceries for old Mrs. Carter, repaired a leaky sink for the cook, and once helped a kid find his lost dog near the tracks. Still, not everyone was ready to forgive a man with a past. One afternoon, as Jack stood outside cleaning the grease from his hands, a low rumble echoed from the far end of the street. 3 motorcycles rolled into view. Black, heavy, loud, the iron vultures. Jack's shoulders stiffened. The lead rider, a tall man with a silver skull on his vest, met his eyes as they passed. Jack didn't move. He just watched until the roar faded down the hill. Ellie, who had stepped outside with a tray of silverware, saw the tension in his jaw. "Friends of yours?" she asked gently. He shook his head. Old life. She didn't push. You're not part of that now, are you? No, he said after a moment. But they don't like when people walk away. The words settled between them, heavy as thunder. That night, the sky clouded again. Jack lay in his shack by the river, listening to the wind howl through the reeds. He turned the pie box over in his hands, tracing Ellie's handwriting on the label. Apple. Extra cinnamon. He smiled to himself, a small, weary smile that belonged to someone who hadn't had much to smile about. Far across town, Ellie sat by the window of her little house, sewing a tear in her apron. She wondered where he was sleeping, if he had a roof. Her mama watched her and said softly, "You've been smiling more, sweetheart." Ellie blushed. "Just a new customer, Mama." "Good men don't always wear good clothes," Margaret said. "Sometimes they just show up with kind eyes." Ellie laughed quietly, shaking her head. "Maybe. But I think he's got more than just kind eyes. He's got a secret." Margaret looked toward the window, her voice gentle. "Then maybe that secret's what needs saving." Outside, the rain started again, light and steady. Somewhere down by the river, Jack sat by a small fire, staring into the flames. The glow danced across his face, softening the lines time had carved there. He wasn't sure if he was meant to stay in this town or move on. But when he closed his eyes, he saw the diner's red sign shining bright again, and her smile behind it. That was enough to make him whisper into the night, "Maybe I'll stay one more day." 2 days later, the wind carried a chill that hinted at the coming of fall. The trees along Maple Hollow's main road shivered in the breeze, their leaves beginning to curl at the edges. Ellie walked home from the diner with her jacket pulled tight, her boots scuffing the gravel shoulder. The air smelled like wood smoke and rain-soaked earth. She thought about Jack, how he had been showing up each morning and fixing small things around the diner, as if trying to repay a debt she never asked for. When she turned the corner to her street, her steps slowed. Her landlord's old truck sat outside their house. A folded sheet of paper flapped under the porch light. An eviction notice. Ellie's stomach dropped. She ran up the steps, pulling the paper free, her heart thudding. Rent overdue. Payment required in 7 days. Inside, Margaret sat in her chair knitting, unaware of the paper Ellie now held. Sammy looked up from the floor, a math book open in front of him. "What's wrong, Elle?" he asked. "Nothing we can't handle," she said, forcing a small smile. But her hands trembled as she folded the paper and slid it into her pocket. That night, after dinner, she stood at the sink, staring out the window at the dark yard. The roof still leaked when it rained. The back fence leaned half-collapsed. She whispered a short prayer she wasn't even sure she believed. "God, I'm doing my best. I just need a little help." A sound interrupted her, a faint clatter from outside. She turned off the water and listened. Another clink, then a low curse carried on the wind. Heart pounding, Ellie grabbed the flashlight by the door and stepped onto the porch. "Who's out there?" she called. The beam of her flashlight caught a figure kneeling under the eaves, broad shoulders, black jacket glistening with dew. Jack. He looked up, eyes squinting against the light. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said. "Jack, what are you doing here?" He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "You mentioned your roof leaks. Figured I'd patch it before the next rain." Ellie blinked. How do you even know where I live?" He gave a small shrug. "Small town. I asked around. Didn't mean no harm." She lowered the flashlight. "You shouldn't be here this late." Probably not, he admitted. But you shouldn't have water dripping on your mother's head either. Something in the quiet way he said it made her throat tighten. You could have asked first. Would you have said yes? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Probably not. Then I did the right thing, he said, trying to smile. Ellie sighed. You're impossible. Been called worse, he said. Now hand me that hammer before I lose my nerve. For the next hour, Jack worked in the dim glow of her porch light, steady and silent except for the soft thud of nails and the occasional muttered comment about lazy carpenters. Ellie brought him a mug of coffee and sat on the steps, watching. She saw the muscles in his arms flex with each swing, the careful way he checked every shingle twice. He didn't rush. He didn't complain. He worked like a man paying off an invisible debt. When he finally climbed down, his hair was damp with sweat. Should hold for a while, he said. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded, glancing at the small house, the flicker of a lamp through the window. You've got good people here. We do our best. For a moment they stood in silence, the night around them filled with the sound of crickets. Then the low growl of an engine broke the calm. Headlights swept across the yard. A black van rolled by slow, too slow. Jack's body tensed. From the open window, a man's voice shouted, "You're dead to us, Raven!" The van roared away, tires spitting gravel. Ellie turned to Jack, confused and frightened. What was that? Who are they? He rubbed the back of his neck, face shadowed. Old friends, he said bitterly. The kind I don't want anymore. What does Raven mean? He hesitated, then met her eyes. It was my road name, back when I rode with the Iron Vultures. Her face paled. That's a gang, isn't it? Was, he said. Not anymore. Jack, are you in trouble? I was born in trouble, he said quietly. Trying to do better now. Ellie stepped back, her mind spinning. You should go. He nodded, voice rough. Yeah, that's probably best. She watched him walk toward the road, his boots crunching gravel. The taillight of his bike blinked red before disappearing into the night. The sound of the engine faded until there was only the hum of crickets and the pounding of her heart. Inside, Margaret looked up from her knitting. Who was that? Ellie leaned against the door, trying to steady her breathing. Just someone trying to help. Margaret's eyes softened. And did he? Ellie glanced out the window at the patched roof. Yes, Mama, he did. Later, when everyone was asleep, Ellie sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the eviction notice. She thought of Jack's face in the flashlight beam, the weariness in his eyes, the sound of that man's voice calling him by another name. She whispered into the darkness, What are you running from, Jack Mallory? Out on the edge of town, Jack rode until the gas light on his bike glowed red. He pulled over near the bridge and killed the engine. The night was cold, the stars sharp and bright. He took off his gloves, staring at the scars on his hands. The faces of his old brothers haunted him. Their laughter, the roar of engines, the wrongs they'd done together. He'd tried to bury that part of his life, but the past never stayed dead. He thought of Ellie's frightened eyes, the way her voice trembled when she told him to go. She's right, he muttered. I ruin everything I touch. He lay down beside the bike, jacket pulled over him, and stared at the stars until they blurred. For the first time in years, he wished someone would tell him he was wrong. But the night stayed silent, and he closed his eyes, carrying the sound of her voice into uneasy sleep. Morning broke gray and still. Jack sat under the bridge beside his motorcycle, rubbing his hands to keep warm. The fire he'd built had gone out hours ago, leaving only a thin thread of smoke. His jacket still smelled faintly of the tar and oil from the night before. Sleep hadn't come easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the voice shouting "Raven," like a ghost that wouldn't let him be. He packed up his few things and pushed the bike toward the junkyard on the edge of town. Old Gus Holloway, the owner, had offered him odd work the week before, fixing up broken engines, stripping old parts for cash. It wasn't much, but it kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. Gus was a gruff man, with oil-stained fingers and a heart that only showed itself when no one was looking. "You're late," Gus grumbled as Jack walked in through the side gate. Jack set down his bag. "Didn't know I had a start time?" "You do now." Jack smirked and got to work. He didn't mind the grease or the grime. He liked how things made sense here. If something was broken, you found the problem, tightened the right bolt, replaced the bad part, and it worked again. People weren't that easy. By noon, his hands were black with oil. He wiped them on a rag and looked around the cluttered shed for a drink. That's when he noticed a torn Bible lying on a stack of tires, half its cover missing. He picked it up carefully, as if it might crumble. The pages were yellowed and water-stained, but one verse was circled in red. "My grace is sufficient for thee." Jack stared at it, lips tightening. He hadn't touched a Bible since he was a kid. Back then, his mother used to read from one before his father came home drunk and threw it across the room. Jack almost tossed this one too, but something stopped him. Instead, he tucked it into his jacket pocket. Across town, Ellie's day had started just as early. She was sweeping the diner floor when Millie walked in carrying a box of supplies. "You look tired, sweetheart," Millie said. "Didn't sleep much," Ellie admitted. "Too many worries running circles in my head." Millie gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder. "You'll figure it out. You always do." Ellie smiled weakly, but her thoughts were far away. The eviction notice burned in her pocket like a secret. And she couldn't stop thinking about Jack, how he'd fixed the roof without asking, how fear had flashed in his eyes when that van passed. She wanted to believe he meant no harm, but the town had taught her to be careful. That afternoon, a crash shattered the calm. Ellie turned to see the diner's front window rattling. Two teenagers sprinted past, laughing, leaving behind a mess of spilled trash cans. But when she went outside, her stomach dropped. Someone had kicked over the flower pots by the door and spray-painted across the brick wall, "Keep the devil out!" Millie came rushing out, gasping. "Who'd do this?" Ellie's hands shook as she scrubbed at the fresh red paint with a rag. "It's not what you think, Millie." But as if on cue, a few customers whispered from the doorway, "That biker's been hanging around too much." Jack, who had just come to return an old wrench, froze when he saw the mess. He saw the words and then saw Ellie's face. Pale, humiliated, scared. "I'll clean it," he said quietly. "No," Ellie said. "This isn't your fault." But he didn't listen. He grabbed a bucket and brush from the side shed and began scrubbing. Millie tried to stop him, but he just said, "Let me do this." By the time the wall was clean, his hands were raw. He turned to Ellie, his voice rough. "People need someone to blame. Might as well be me." Ellie looked at him for a long moment, tears threatening. "You didn't do anything wrong." He shrugged. "I used to." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Why do you keep helping us?" Jack looked at her then. Really looked. "Because you hugged me," he said. "And I didn't deserve it." The words hung between them like smoke. Ellie's throat tightened, and she turned away before the tears spilled over. "You're wrong," she whispered. "Everybody deserves a little grace." Jack didn't answer. He just stared at the ground, where his shadow stretched long in the late sunlight. That evening, Ellie's mother grew weaker. The medicine bottle was nearly empty, and Ellie counted the pills twice, knowing they wouldn't last the week. She sat by the window after putting Sammy to bed, staring at the fading daylight. When she saw movement outside, she stood, heart racing, but it was only Jack, walking toward the house with a paper bag in his hands. He knocked softly. "Didn't mean to intrude," he said when she opened the door. "Brought this." Inside the bag were 2 cans of soup and a small bottle of medicine. "How did you—" she began. "I asked Millie what you needed. Don't worry, I paid for it. Junkyard money." Her lip quivered. "You didn't have to." "Yeah," he said quietly, "but I wanted to." For the first time, she saw him smile. Not the half-smile he used when he was being polite, but something real, small, shy, almost boyish. She found herself smiling back. They ate together at the kitchen table, talking softly so as not to wake Margaret. When Jack noticed the family photo on the wall, a young man with his arm around Margaret, Ellie a child at their knees, he said, "Your father?" Ellie nodded. "Died when I was 12. Car wreck." Jack looked down. "I'm sorry." "Me too," she said. "He used to say the world breaks everyone, but God mends what's worth keeping." Jack thought of the torn Bible in his pocket and said, almost to himself, "Maybe he's got a big job ahead." When the clock struck 9, Jack stood to leave. "You'll be safe now? Roof's solid? Medicine's stocked. I'll keep an eye out for that van." "Jack," Ellie said softly, following him to the door, "you don't owe me anything." He turned, his expression unreadable. "Maybe I do. You're the first person in 10 years who treated me like I wasn't a monster." And then he was gone, walking into the dusk, his figure swallowed by the shadows of the streetlights. Ellie closed the door, heart heavy and full at the same time. She went to her mother's side, whispering, "He's not what they say he is, Mama. He's trying." Margaret, half awake, smiled faintly. Even the hardest hearts can turn soft in the hands of grace. Out under the bridge, Jack sat by his fire again. He took the Bible from his pocket and turned to the circled verse. The light from the flames danced on the words. He read them aloud, slow and uncertain. "My grace is sufficient for thee." He stared at the river, the sound of its flow steady and calm. "Hope you're right," he whispered. Then he closed the Bible and held it to his chest, listening to the night's quiet. For the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. Sunday morning dawned clear and cool. The church bells of Maple Hollow rang across the valley, calling folks to service. Ellie walked the dirt road with Sammy skipping beside her, his clean shirt too big for his shoulders. Margaret couldn't make it. Her strength had waned again. Ellie promised she'd pray extra for her. When they passed the junkyard, Sammy slowed. "Think he'll come to church?" he asked. Ellie smiled softly. "Maybe one day." Jack didn't go to church. I spent his morning fixing the motor of a broken tractor Gus had traded for scrap. Sweat rolled down his temple, and the old Bible sat nearby on the workbench, pages fluttering in the breeze. Every time his eyes caught the circled verse, he felt something twist inside him, a pull he didn't quite understand. By noon, the sun was high. Jack cleaned his hands and headed toward town to grab lunch. But when he reached the diner, he noticed people whispering again. The air inside was heavy. Millie gave him a quick, warning look, but before she could speak, a man at the corner booth, Deacon Myers, leaned back and muttered, "Didn't think we'd see you here again?" Jack stopped mid-step. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," the man said. "We don't need your kind around the good folks of this town." Ellie came out from the kitchen, freezing when she saw them. "Mr. Myers, that's enough," she said sharply. The man scoffed. "You'd defend him? You don't even know what he's done." "I know what he's done here," Ellie said, voice trembling but firm. "He's helped people, fixed roofs, fed my family when we had nothing. You can talk about faith all day long, but if you can't see a man trying to change, then maybe you're the one who doesn't know grace." The diner went silent. Mr. Myers grabbed his coat and stormed out, muttering under his breath. Millie sighed and muttered, "Well, that'll make Sunday gossip interesting." Jack stared at Ellie, speechless. "You didn't have to do that?" "Yes, I did," she said simply. For a long time he didn't say anything. Then, quietly, "Thank you." From that day things changed. Some folks grew colder. A few regulars stopped coming altogether, but others began to see what Ellie saw. Jack fixed Mrs. Carter's porch railing for free. He repaired a widower's old pickup that had sat rusting for months. Even Sheriff Danner, who had made a habit of watching Jack from across the street, began to nod a greeting now and then. Still, the town's acceptance came slow. One evening, Jack stood outside the diner after closing, wiping grease from his hands, when Sheriff Danner approached. The man's boots crunched on gravel as he stopped beside him. "You've been busy," Danner said, arms crossed. Jack didn't look up. "Idle hands, right?" Danner grunted. "Just making sure your busy hands don't get into trouble?" Jack met his gaze then, calm but steady. "You watching me, Sheriff?" "Always," Danner said, and walked off. Ellie stepped out just in time to see Danner leaving. "He still doesn't trust you," she said. "He's right not to," Jack said quietly. "I've earned that." She frowned. "You can't live forever trying to pay for the past." He gave a sad smile. "Can't live pretending it never happened either." A week later, something unexpected happened. A local farmer's truck broke down on the church road, and Jack, passing by on his bike, stopped to help. The farmer turned out to be Deacon Myers himself. For a tense moment, neither spoke. Then Jack crouched, lifted the hood, and got to work. 20 minutes later, the truck sputtered back to life. Myers stood awkwardly beside him. "Didn't ask for your help," he muttered. Jack shrugged. "Didn't need to." The man hesitated. "You ever think about coming to church?" Jack glanced up. "Wouldn't want to make folks uncomfortable." "Maybe it's time we got a little uncomfortable," Myers said quietly before climbing into the truck. Jack watched the vehicle disappear in a cloud of dust. For the first time in a long while, he felt something like hope stir beneath his ribs. That evening, Ellie stopped by the junkyard with Sammy and a basket of food. "You skipped lunch again, didn't you?" she teased, setting the basket on a crate. Jack laughed, a deep, rough sound that surprised even him. Guilty. While Sammy explored the piles of scrap, Ellie sat on an overturned tire and handed Jack a sandwich. "You're starting to change people's minds," she said. Jack took a bite. "Or you are." "Maybe both," she said. "People are seeing what I see." He looked at her, the late sun glinting in his eyes. "And what's that?" "A man trying to make things right." He shook his head softly, smiling. "You've got too much faith, Ellie." "Maybe," she said, "but I think God's got more." The sound of Sammy's laughter filled the yard, light and easy. Jack watched the boy race through the maze of old car parts, arms stretched wide like wings. For the first time, Jack didn't feel like a ghost haunting his own life. Later that night, he rode through town. People waved now, some hesitantly, some with genuine warmth. At the diner, Millie flipped the sign to "closed," but smiled and lifted a hand when she saw him pass. He tipped his head in thanks. He parked by the bridge and turned off the engine, the night settling around him. In the stillness, He took out the Bible again and thumbed through its pages. When he found the circled verse, he whispered it out loud, "My grace is sufficient." Then he closed his eyes and said softly, "Maybe it is." The river murmured beneath him, calm and steady, as if it agreed. Autumn crept softly into Maple Hollow. The trees along the back roads turned amber and gold, and the chill of early morning carried the smell of wood smoke from stoves and chimneys. Jack had started coming into town more often now, less like a shadow, more like a neighbor. The townsfolk didn't all smile, but fewer frowned. That, to him, was progress. He had taken over the back corner of Gus Holloway's junkyard as his own little workspace. The shed had a roof now, patched with tin, and a small stove that hissed when he brewed coffee. Ellie often brought sandwiches from the diner, claiming they were extras. Jack didn't argue, though. He knew she made them just for him. One crisp Sunday, Ellie invited him to come to church. "You don't have to stay the whole time," she said, straightening his collar like it mattered. "Just come for the music." Jack shifted uncomfortably. "I don't belong there." "Then you'll fit right in," she said, smiling. That morning, he parked his motorcycle behind the small white church, away from the main crowd. The building was simple. White siding, steeple leaning slightly, windows glowing warm with candlelight. From inside came the sound of singing. Jack stood at the doorway for a long time before he stepped in. Heads turned. The music faltered for a second. Jack froze, ready to leave, but then Ellie looked back from her pew and smiled. She scooted over, making room. Slowly, he walked down the aisle and sat beside her. The pastor, a gray-haired man named Reverend Hayes, smiled uncertainly, then continued the hymn. Jack kept his head down, his voice silent, but his eyes burned as the congregation sang Amazing Grace. He hadn't heard that song since his daughter's funeral. When the sermon began, he listened quietly. Reverend Hayes spoke about forgiveness, the kind that doesn't erase the past but redeems it. Jack didn't look up, but the words sank deep. After the service, as people filed out, little Sammy ran up and hugged Jack around the waist. "You came," he said. Jack chuckled, resting a big hand on the boy's shoulder. "Guess I did." Ellie beamed. "Told you he would." Across the lawn, Reverend Hayes approached. Jack braced himself for judgment, but instead, the pastor extended his hand. "Glad you joined us today," he said. Jack shook it carefully. "Not sure I'll make it a habit." "That's all right," Hayes said kindly. "Grace works even when we don't show up." That week became the best Jack had known in years. He fixed a neighbor's tractor, repaired the church bell rope, and even took Sammy for short rides around the junkyard, teaching him how engines worked. The boy looked at him with open admiration that made Jack's throat tighten. "Wish my dad could see this," Sammy said once, grinning through wind-tangled hair. Jack's hands stilled on the handlebars. "Bet he'd be proud of you, kid." Sammy shrugged. "Ellie says God lets people look down sometimes. Maybe he lets you too." That night, Jack sat by his fire, staring at the Bible again. He'd started reading a page or two every evening. He didn't understand it all, but he liked the quiet it brought. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to think about the future. Not just surviving, but living. Maybe he could open a little repair shop, do honest work. Maybe he could earn enough to fix up a real home someday. But peace doesn't stay long for men with old ghosts. One morning, as he prepared to head into town, he found a piece of paper tucked under his motorcycle seat. The handwriting was rough and familiar. "You don't leave the vultures. The vultures leave you." Jack's chest went tight. His hands shook as he crumpled the note. He looked around. No one in sight. But he felt eyes on him. The peace of the past weeks vanished like mist. When he got to the diner, Ellie noticed right away. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he lied. "You look like you saw a ghost." "Just thinking too much?" He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. That afternoon, he walked Ellie home as usual, though he kept glancing behind them. Every sound, the distant hum of an engine, a crow's cry, set his nerves on edge. At her gate, Ellie turned to him. "You sure you're all right, Jack?" He hesitated. "There are some folks who don't like that I left things behind. They might come around." "Come around?" she repeated, alarmed. "I'll handle it," he said quickly. "You don't need to worry." She crossed her arms. "That's not how this works. If you're in danger, we are too." Jack looked at her, her face fierce in the fading light, and for a moment he almost smiled. "You've got more fight in you than anyone I know." "Maybe God made me that way," she said. Maybe he did. That night he parked his bike outside the diner, unable to sleep. He sat on the curb, head bowed, the street lamp casting long shadows. Ellie's voice echoed in his mind. "You're not what they say you are. You're trying." He took the Bible from his jacket, flipped to the circled verse again, and whispered it like a promise. "My grace is sufficient." The rumble of distant engines rolled across the hills, faint but unmistakable. Jack looked up toward the sound, his jaw tightening. He didn't run this time. He just whispered, "Not here! Not to her!" Then he stood, ready to face whatever came next. The wind picked up that evening, sweeping through Maple Hollow with a strange chill. The moon hung pale and high, silvering the junkyard and casting long shadows across the heaps of rusted metal. Jack stood in the doorway of his small shack, arms folded, staring out into the dark. The night was too quiet. The kind of quiet that came before trouble. He'd felt it building all week, small signs that his old world was creeping back. A bike tail light in the distance when he rode home. Footsteps that vanished when he turned. The note under his seat that still burned in his jacket pocket. He'd done everything right. Worked honest, helped people, stayed out of fights, but men like him didn't get clean breaks. They got warnings. And then they got war. Jack turned back to the workbench, fiddling with a carburetor to calm his nerves. Gus had gone home hours ago, and the junkyard was empty except for the hum of insects. The only light came from the bare bulb overhead and the red glow of his small stove. He thought about Ellie. Her laugh, her courage, her family's house with the patched roof. He thought about Sammy, who still waved every time Jack's motorcycle passed. And he thought about how easily peace could be stolen away. Around midnight, he finally stretched out on his cot. The sound of the wind through the tin roof almost lulled him to sleep, until the smell hit him. Smoke. He bolted upright. The world outside flickered orange. Flames licked the edge of the shed's wall, curling fast across the dry wood. The air turned thick with heat and the crackle of fire. Jack grabbed his jacket and ran out, coughing as black smoke filled his lungs. The junkyard was burning. Tires exploded in the distance. The fire roared like an angry animal, feeding on oil and rust and old rags. Through the haze, he saw them. 3 shadows near the fence line, their faces hidden under helmets. One raised an arm in a mock salute before disappearing into the darkness on roaring motorcycles. The vultures. "Cowards," Jack shouted, his voice lost in the roar of the flames. He ran back inside, snatching a blanket and a metal bar, slapping at the growing fire. But it was hopeless. The heat forced him back, blistering his hands. His lungs burned. He stumbled out, fell to his knees in the dirt, and watched as everything he'd built in the past months went up in flames. By dawn, the fire was out, leaving only smoke and blackened wreckage. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up beside the fence. Danner stepped out, chewing on a toothpick, eyes scanning the damage. "Fire department said you called it in late," he said, voice flat. "I was asleep," Jack rasped. His throat felt raw. Danner kicked at a charred beam. "Funny thing is, folks say they saw you near the gas pumps last night. Some think you did it yourself." Jack's head snapped up. "What?" "Maybe for insurance," Danner said. "You've got a record, Mallory. Wouldn't be the first time a man torched his own mess." "I didn't," Jack began, but Danner raised a hand. "Save it. You'll have a chance to explain downtown." 2 deputies came around the corner. One cuffed Jack's hands before he could speak. The steel bit into the burns on his palms. "You're making a mistake," he said through gritted teeth. "Maybe," Danner replied, "but it's the safe one." As they led him to the cruiser, Ellie's old pickup screeched to a stop nearby. She jumped out, breathless, hair coming loose around her face. "Sheriff, what's going on?" "Stay back, Miss Thompson," Danner warned. "This doesn't concern you." "It does concern me," she shouted. "What happened?" Danner jerked his thumb toward the smoking wreck. "Your friend burned down half the junkyard. You might want to pick your company better." Ellie looked at Jack, his blistered hands, his soot-streaked face, his eyes dark with disbelief. "Tell me it's not true," she whispered. "It's not," he said, voice hoarse. "I swear, Ellie, it was them, the vultures." Danner scoffed. "You expect me to believe a gang came all the way? Here to light a bonfire just to send you a message?" "Yes," Jack said simply. "That's exactly what I expect you to believe." But Danner wasn't listening. The deputies shoved Jack into the back seat. Ellie grabbed Danner's arm. "Please, don't do this. He wouldn't lie to me." The sheriff shook her off, gently but firmly. "If he's innocent, he'll prove it. That's how it works." The car door slammed shut, and Ellie stood in the dust as the cruiser drove away. The smoke from the wreck still drifted into the sky, thick and black against the morning sun. She turned and saw Gus standing near the fence, wiping soot from his brow. "It ain't right," he said softly. "That man saved my business more than once. He didn't do this." "I know," Ellie said, her jaw tight, "and I'm going to prove it." Later that afternoon, she found herself at the church, sitting in the empty pews. The sunlight through the stained glass painted her hands in colors. She clasped them together and whispered, "God, if you're listening, please don't let this be the end for him. He's trying. He really is." That night, Jack sat in a small cell at the county jail. His hands throbbed, wrapped in white bandages. The world smelled of disinfectant and cold metal. He leaned back against the wall, exhausted. He could still hear Ellie's voice, her plea for him, the disbelief in her tone when she asked him to deny it. It had cut deeper than the cuffs. For a long time, he stared at the ceiling, the dim light flickering above. Then, softly, he whispered words he hadn't spoken since he was a boy. "God, if you're real, don't let her lose hope in me." Down the hall, a guard passed without a glance. Jack closed his eyes. The prayer hung in the air, unanswered but alive. Across town, Ellie lit a candle on her kitchen table. The flame wavered, fragile but steady. "Please," she whispered, "not this time." Outside, the wind rose again, carrying smoke from the ashes of the junkyard. Somewhere far off, the rumble of motorcycles echoed once more, fading into the hills. But in the quiet between heartbeats, something stronger than fear lingered. Faith. Thin, trembling, but not yet broken. Ellie barely slept. At dawn, she drove straight to the junkyard, her clothes still smelling of smoke. The place looked worse in daylight. Charred frames, blackened earth, twisted metal that once held promise. But as she looked closer, she noticed something strange. A broken security camera on the pole by the gate, its small red light still blinking. "Please," she whispered, "let it have seen something." She found Gus by his pickup and begged him to check the footage. He frowned but nodded. An hour later, the old monitor flickered to life, showing a grainy video from the night before. Ellie leaned forward, her heart pounding. Through the static, 3 figures appeared, wearing helmets and leather jackets marked with the Iron Vulture's insignia. They poured gasoline, lit a rag, and rode off into the dark. Ellie gasped. "There! That's them!" Gus nodded grimly. "Looks that way to me." She took his phone and snapped photos of the screen, then raced to the sheriff's office. Danner looked up from his desk, unimpressed. "You again?" "Watch this," Ellie said, shoving the phone toward him. He stared at the footage for a long moment, his expression shifting. "Well," he muttered, "I'll be." Hours later, Jack sat behind bars when the door swung open. Danner appeared with keys in hand. "You're free to go, Mallory. Looks like you were telling the truth after all." Jack rose slowly, disbelief on his face. "You got them?" "Not yet," Danner said, unlocking the cell. "But we will. Guess I owe you an apology." Jack stepped into the hallway, breathing air that didn't smell of metal and dust. And there she was, Ellie, waiting, eyes bright with relief. She crossed the room without a word and threw her arms around him, holding tight. "You didn't lose faith," he murmured. She pulled back, tears glistening. "No, I just borrowed some of yours." For the first time in weeks, Jack laughed softly. The sound felt strange and holy in the quiet hall. Outside, morning sunlight poured through the clouds like grace itself. Jack and Ellie walked out of the sheriff's office into the bright afternoon sun. The air smelled clean after the night's storm, and for the first time in months, Jack's shoulders felt light. Word spread fast through Maple Hollow. The biker didn't do it. By evening, folks who had turned away began showing up one by one at Millie's place. Jack stood outside the diner, unsure if he should go in. Then the door opened, and Millie herself appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. "You coming in or standing there like a scarecrow?" she teased. The laughter in her eyes broke the last wall inside him. He stepped in, and the room that once fell silent at his presence now filled with claps on the back and warm smiles. In the weeks that followed, Jack rebuilt the burned junkyard into something new. The town helped. Lumber from the sheriff, tools from the church, food from Millie. Ellie painted a wooden sign that read Grace Garage, nailed it above the new door, and grinned at him. "Now folks can bring their broken things, and their broken hearts," she said. Jack worked harder than ever, fixing bikes and old engines, never charging those who couldn't pay. He trained a few young men just out of jail, giving them purpose the world had taken away. Ellie stopped by each day with coffee and laughter that filled the place brighter than the sun. One morning, as dawn painted the mountains pink, she found Jack watching her quietly. "What?" she asked, blushing. He smiled, a real, easy smile. "That hug of yours," he said softly, "changed everything." She stepped closer, her eyes shining. "Then maybe it wasn't a mistake after all." Their fingers brushed, simple and gentle, as the sound of the church bell drifted through town. For the first time in his life, Jack felt he'd come home. By late November, Maple Hollow had almost forgotten fear. Grace Garage buzzed with steady work, laughter, and the smell of oil and coffee. Jack had built something real, something honest. Ellie and Sammy often dropped by to bring cookies or help paint old signs. It felt like peace might last. Then one cold evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the sound of engines shattered the calm. Jack looked up from the workbench, and froze. 5 motorcycles rolled into the yard, chrome gleaming under the dusk light. The Iron Vultures. At their lead was Vulture Sampson, a massive man with eyes like rusted steel. "Well, well," Sampson called out, cutting his engine. "Didn't think our little Raven would hide behind Bible folks." Jack stepped forward, calm but firm. "I'm not Raven anymore." Sampson laughed, low and cruel. "You don't quit family, boy." "This isn't family," Jack said. "It's a cage." The men circled, engines growling. Across the street, Ellie saw the commotion from her porch and ran toward them, shouting his name. The gang turned. Sampson sneered. "That your preacher's girl? She's got guts." "Leave her out of this," Jack warned. Sampson dismounted, tossing his cigarette aside. "You always were soft." He swung a fist, but Jack didn't strike back. He stood his ground, blood at the corner of his lip. "You can't break a man who's forgiven you," Jack said, voice steady. For a moment, no one moved. Then Sheriff Danner's siren wailed from the road. The gang cursed and fled, tires spitting gravel. Ellie ran to Jack as the sheriff pulled in. He swayed, dizzy, exhaustion and smoke from the old fire finally catching up to him. She caught him before he fell. "Jack, stay with me." He smiled faintly. "Looks like the storm passed, Ellie." Then his eyes fluttered shut. The night grew still again, only the church bell echoing far away, calling the town to witness the price of redemption. Jack woke to the soft beeping of hospital machines and the smell of antiseptic. For a long moment he didn't know where he was. Then he turned his head and saw Ellie asleep in the chair beside him, her hand resting in his. Her hair was tangled, her eyes swollen from crying, but even in sleep she looked peaceful. When she stirred and saw him awake, tears filled her eyes again. "You scared me," she whispered, gripping his hand tighter. "Guess I'm too stubborn to die," he rasped with a weak grin. She laughed, half sobbing. "You're too needed to die." Over the next weeks, the town came together in a way Jack never imagined possible. People brought food, sent cards, and even helped finish rebuilding the garage. Gus patched the walls, Millie organized a fundraiser dinner, and the sheriff stopped by to shake Jack's hand. No badge, no warnings, just respect. When Jack was strong enough to walk again, Ellie drove him to Grace Garage. The morning light poured through the open doors, gleaming on polished tools and fresh paint. A crowd waited. Friends, church members, even a few strangers, cheering as he stepped inside. Above the entrance hung a new sign carved by Sammy, Grace Garage, where broken things get fixed. Jack blinked back tears. "Didn't know I had this many friends," he said. Ellie smiled. "You didn't. You earned them." As the crowd drifted away, a young volunteer from the church hurried in with a basket and, by accident, wrapped Jack in a sudden hug. The room burst into laughter. Jack froze for a second, then chuckled softly. "Careful," he said, glancing at Ellie. "That's how it all started." Ellie stepped close and hugged him herself, warm and sure. And that's how it should end. Outside, the church bell rang, sunlight spilling over the valley. Jack closed his eyes, holding her close, the sound of laughter echoing through Grace Garage. He smiled and whispered, "It only took one hug to change everything." Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.